Residential tech talk, lighting specialist, residential tech.
All right, we are back on the Residential Tech Talks podcast and excited today to be joined by Kathleen Thomas, the new head of custom integration sales at Sony. And Kathleen, it's only been a few weeks in the role and in the new job there at Sony and everything. So I really look forward to diving into it with you. But first of all, just appreciate you having the time and being willing to jump on and talk with us and dive into a Residential Tech Talks podcast with us.
Absolutely. Super excited.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, give us a little bit of info about yourself and your background, and then we'll dive into, everything present day and what you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So fun fact about KT is I actually have been in the industry since I was 2 weeks old,
Wow.
which, yeah.
When you say born into it, basically born into it.
Born into it, yes. So when I was 2 weeks old, both my parents were working at a hi-fi store in Atlanta, Georgia called Hi-Fi Buys that later got bought by Tweeter back in the day. But I was in their first commercial when they opened their doors in 1973. So we're not supposed to say how old we are, but now everybody can find out. But yeah, and literally grew up in hi-fi stores. My parents were later sales reps, grew up packing literature, and, the summers taking orders on the phone for,
Wow.
Denon receivers and Canton speakers and all that kind of stuff. And, when I got out of college with a insanely useful degree in art, it was pretty easy to go, what do I want to do? And I, called up the folks at Hi-Fi Buys, which by then was, a 10-store chain in Atlanta, and said, hey guys, I need a job. And, was fortunate enough that, I'm a total Nepo baby. I admit it. And they gave me a job. And, so that was really my start in the industry.
Well, many questions. One, I could ask any art major what they were thinking, right? What was did you have a plan with art? To be completely honest.
Yeah. Well, so What's funny enough, what it was I had grown up and I was a total nerd. I spent my summers at Duke University, had a mentor at Harvard, did, AP courses starting in 7th grade. And honestly, wow. I was burnt out by the end of high school. And so I went to art school to just do something completely different and, make myself a more well-rounded individual, which might be the nerdiest thing I've ever done.
But that's awesome. Like that's really cool though. And yeah. I think it speaks to, you mentioned the term's perfect, well-roundedness. Did you learn anything or can you pull anything from that experience of 100%. Doing that? And
yeah, 100%. So what I studied was actually video production, which, does still lean into what I do now. But I would say the most valuable thing, and it's funny because it came to me when I was first moved into management many years ago at AudioQuest. So I was VP of sales at AudioQuest for several years. And it was funny because my boss at the time goes like, wow, you're such a good manager. I'm not, this is a humble brag, but you're such a good manager. How did you become such a good manager? And it really goes back to, I used to have to, manage these video productions in school and, you'd have to have the DP, the camera guy, that you'd have to have the sound guy, all this kind of stuff, and get them excited about a project and get them on board. And I couldn't pay them. And I'm like, imagine how much I can get people motivated if I'm also giving them money.
Right? It's a little bit easier, I think, to be able to do that. Well, it's funny too. You mentioned like the broadcast stuff tied to art. That sound, I have a broadcast journalism background. I, doing a couple things in that field and obviously related to, but to call that art sounds, like they just didn't have the major in mind for what it should be.
The work I did was very, very weird, artsy stuff.
Gotcha.
More like video installations like you would
Yeah.
see in a museum. I mean, there are people that graduate from there, and it was Savannah College of Art and Design, so they're a big school.
Yeah.
Now they were a little school when I was there, but they have people that go on to CNN and things like that. But really my focus, especially because I was really there to do something different, was to really explore my creative side. And I would say that also helps, just being able to think outside the box, think of ways to innovate and be an agent of change, and to kind of bold and speak up and
Hmm.
all those sorts of things. I
Yeah.
think there's so many things that you learn in college that aren't necessarily directly what you are going to do in life, but it's about that life
Yep.
experience and bringing your life experiences to what you do for work every day.
Absolutely. I love that for sure, that message. And, I'm used to asking this of integrators when I talk to them. It's awesome that I also get to ask it of you. And you kind of alluded to it. You called yourself a Nepo baby. But at the same time, did you feel like you had an option in terms of getting involved in family business? Or, I know you kind of explained your story, but like it's cool to be able to have that background and that, working for an electronics store and within this space, like it just to be able to tap into that is so cool. So I mean, did it feel natural and like something that was also just pulling you naturally towards it to want to do?
Yeah, 100. I mean, at first, I would say it started off as this is a job that can actually like support me, that I can easily get because I know people that have known me since I was a little kid. But then once I started, I've always really loved music. My parents were musicians, and so we always had music in my house, and that's really where I fell in love with it. I remember the first time going into the store that I worked at, the location I worked at had the high end rooms, and going into the high end rooms and listening to a pair of Sonos Faber Extremas, which were $10,000, which was a really really expensive. That would be like a $50,000 speaker now because I'm so old, and and just going, oh my gosh, like this is why people need to make money, so that they can afford things like this. Like this is, and just I really believe that music, and entertainment and things like that is how we tell stories, and it's such a visceral part of who we are as people.
Yeah.
And so it's not just like products and things like that, but the closer we can get to that performance and that connection with the artist, I think it's something that really feeds the soul.
Yeah.
To get a little woo woo about it. I just think it's a fundamental part of who we are as people to make those connections. It's such a privilege to work in an industry where we're providing that we're providing that.
Yeah.
You have a hard day at work, you come home and you can just relax and kind of get back into yourself and connect with other people through
Yeah.
through entertainment.
It almost feels like the high five by salesperson is coming out in you, right? Which is awesome. I love that because I mean the next easy transitional question here is like, what can you still pull from that experience to what you're doing today? I think we just heard it, so like
Yeah, no,
it's awesome.
100%, 100%. And I was very, very fortunate too. I have to name drop another kind of legendary company. I was really fortunate that after once Hi-Fi Buys got bought by Tweeter, and this was the spoiled Nepo baby in me. I was like, well, I don't know anybody here anymore, and I kind of was a number instead of a person there, and so I was like, I took my retirement fund that at 25 I was fully vested in, and I said, I've never lived in the Pacific Northwest. I've always lived in the Southeast. So I literally just moved across the country and
Wow.
was fortunate enough to also work at Magnolia. Magnolia, this was back when they were still Magnolia Hi-Fi. and owned by the Tweeten family, and work with that team as well. So I've been really, really fortunate in my career to just work with amazing teams that really understood the value of what we do every day.
Yeah, and to then land at Sony, let's talk about the time here. I know we'll get to present day, but walk us through sort of how you came in and what you've been doing at Sony.
Yeah, so I came on board a little over 4 years ago. I had actually worked with Jeff Goldstein, my predecessor. We had worked together at Bowers and Wilkins, building out a CI platform for them. And Jeff had left and gone back to Sony to lead the CI team at Sony. And he kept in contact with me, and he's like, "I'm getting you over here." And I was just like, I I sell high-end hi-fi, right? I sell expensive
Yep.
speakers. I'm not going to sell TVs. And then he eventually wooed me over, and obviously Sony also sells fantastic audio products and receivers and things like that. And but really, it was I really reframed it and was like, it's about performance and about that connection. And so, and I don't think, especially on the video side, that nobody out there, I think, takes it as seriously as Sony in terms of really working with the creators to create that, to recreate the artist's intent in the home. And that really spoke to me. And and to get to work with Jeff again was such a great fit. So I came on board and was managing the western third of the United States, so the western zone, and working with all the reps in the territory, and things like that, and also working with Jeff hand in hand to on more national objectives, like working with the buying groups and national initiatives, and the national distributors and things like that as well. So I feel really fortunate in my time with Jeff, and still consider him one of my best friends. He's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And we're this close to talking about it, but you mentioned something that makes me want to follow up on it because you mentioned Sony, and obviously that the inherent just sort of importance they put on the entertainment experience, and it came to mind that obviously they have like an end-to-end view on things too, right? Because they've got
Yeah.
Sony Studios with the movie production and everything there. Does that come into play at all? Like, are you able to talk to those other parts of the business to see sort of how things influence one another and really elevate that experience for the end user?
Yeah, for sure. One of the most unique things about Sony, just as a company, is we really are part of every single little piece of the entertainment chain.
Yeah.
Whether you think of movies, video games, music, we're part of the creation of the content, and then also on the reproduction side, and honestly everything in between. So you know almost any TV show or film that you see was color graded on a Sony monitor, or filmed on a Sony camera, or
Right.
use Sony microphones in the field. It's the technology that we use with our Hawkeye division in sports. We're literally there at every single step. And the care with which we go to the extremes to recreate that in people's homes. It's little details, like
Yeah.
that we make sure that projectors and TVs are calibrated out of the box to be as close as possible to what we know they're seeing on our BVM monitors, which are what are used to color grade films. The way that the woman who's the senior VP at Sony Pictures in charge of all the audio stuff, she basically gives the little checkbox on any audio product that we do, to make sure that it's recreating that experience that, she works with so hard with her team to create in the mixing studios. It's just all those little details of care that only Sony can do because we are there. Like we know what Tom Holland's, a Spider-Man outfit. We know what color that was. We know what that sound is supposed to sound like, because that sound of his little, the web coming out was created in the Foley studio, at the Sony Pictures lot. And so we're able to really bring that into people's homes, which is that's just cool. It's so cool and fun to be able to tell those stories. And it's also such a great, I really see the best salespeople, in our industry are storytellers. So to give our dealers such a great story to be able to tell their customers about the product that they're buying, that it's just not some commodity that, an engineer sat and spec'd, that this is really brought to you by people that are incredibly passionate about what they do.
I appreciate you diving into that. And because to your point, it gives that perspective on, it is an end-to-end solution from literally the filming of what it is that's going to be reproduced in that customer's home, or, on even to, the commercial side of things on a theater screen, and just the attention to detail throughout, I think, is important for an integrator to understand, so that they can, again, to your point, share that story with their clients or customers as they're, going through their own sales processes and working on projects. So it's a unique perspective for sure, and one that, deserves to be called out that way. So thank you for that. And now we get to talk about the man. so Jeff, the influence, right? So, I recently retired, which I know it's crazy to think, I feel like he's been involved forever. But recently retired and handed over the reins. Talk about his influence. Obviously influential in bringing you to Sony, which is pretty cool. But just his influence on the company, the channel, and even you personally. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jeff Goldstein definitely is, I think, in a lot of ways, a legend that more than most people in the industry really even know, in terms of all the stuff that he did behind the scenes, even beyond, he was really part of, bringing Sony to Cedia and the initial creation of Cedia. Sony was at the table at the dawn of Cedia, and a lot of that is due to Jeff. And the creation of some of the first multi-room devices, and he was a part of that, at every step of the way. And what's funny is a lot of people, the higher up people at Sony actually worked under Jeff. So including our CEO, Neil Manowitz. So he worked with Jeff, even starting as an intern, when Neil first started.
Wow.
And so, there's just so many people at Sony that have worked with Jeff over the years. And he's always, it was funny because when he left Sony briefly for a few years, to go do a few other things, he always said the only reason why he would come back, the only job he would come back and take, was to lead the CI team. So that's the only reason why he came back to Sony, was because he loved the channel. He loved managing it, and it was how he wanted to end his career. So he came back basically saying, look, you only got me for a few years. This is the only job I'm doing. Believe me, they tried to actually move him up, and he was like, no, this is where I want to end my career.
That's awesome.
And he was, in bringing me on and bringing me along in the job, and really being so generous to me to teach me all the ins and outs of Sony over the past few years. It was just incredibly generous, and I'm just infinitely grateful to him. And I also did make him promise never to block my calls. So he still texts me to check on everything.
Yep.
So I get
love
my
that.
little text messages. How's everything going? How's this dealer doing? How's inventory? I'm like, it's all good, Jeff. We're good.
That's awesome. That's so good. So still has an influence. That's incredible.
100%. He's never leaving.
That's fantastic. Well, despite that continued influence, obviously his retirement is a big change for the company, and one that I know. What's interesting though, it sounds like they had time to you all had time to prepare for it, which is nice, because if you know it's coming, you can get ready for it and put that succession plan in place. But formally leading through that transition, talk about what that's been like for you and how you're managing that.
Well, it's been 3 weeks. I'm still standing.
It's a good start.
Yeah. I think it's about as much as I can spend for myself right now. No, it's like I said, he was so generous in terms of, making sure that I was incredibly well prepared. And also I have managed at a national level before. So, I know a lot of the people involved across the country. And, so I do have a lot of those connections, which is really, really helpful. So, thankfully I'm not starting from ground zero, but, it's definitely, you definitely feel the weight. And, but also I have so many ideas to bring to the table, and, as much as, everything, I'm not looking to really change anything that Jeff did, because I think he really, transformed the business and did such an amazing job, in terms of, really bringing business tools to our dealers, and doing things like marketing and things like that on behalf of them. But I think everybody always brings their own style and ideas to to any venture. And one of the unique perspectives that I have is, unlike Jeff, and unlike Frank, before Jeff, I actually worked as a regional, so I know intimately any of those friction points and things like that in terms of the processes that our dealers work with. And so one of the first things I'm doing is kind of diving headfirst and seeing I love processes, and I find them really liberating, because people know what to expect, and we can help relieve some of those friction points in terms of doing business. And one of the ways I've always viewed our job at Sony is, Sony is this giant, very complicated company, that clearly is doing a lot of different things. And we also work with Tech Data, which is, TD SYNNEX, which is our master distributor, which is also another big company that's doing a lot of different things. And so it can really be overwhelming for a small integrator. And our job with the CI team at Sony is to make it small. To make it feel personal, to give that personalized service. And so I'm diving in and looking at all of those friction points to see how can we make that a more personal, easy experience for the smaller integrator. Because like a lot of integrators, even if they're lucky enough to have, somebody in the office and things like that, a lot of times people are wearing 6 or 7 hats, right? And so, stopping to think, okay, I have this one TV. It's the first Sony TV that I've had that's been maybe, broken or something in the past 5 years, because thank goodness our stuff doesn't break very much. And they're like, oh man, how do I write an ATR? So, okay, how do we relieve that process a bit and make it easier for them? And so little things like that are kind of the first things I'm taking on head on.
I love that, because it to me it calls back to a could be overthinking it maybe potentially, but like your experience with transitioning from hi-fi buys to tweeter, where right, like you went from you have a personal experience and very hands-on with everything to kind of that feeling like a number, like you mentioned. You don't want integrators, right, in the same
No.
boat where you're dealing with a bigger company. You don't want to feel like a number. You want to have that personalized experience. And
100%.
no, I love that for sure. It's a unique thing, and I look forward to seeing how that plays out in your early days and over your time here. To that point though, too, because you mentioned the transition. I think another area where that kind of applies, and would love your perspective. The leadership change between from Jeff to you. Could you call back on anything from what you experienced going through the leadership change with Hi-Fi Buys to Tweeter, and how that went to make sure that a transition is successful?
That's an interesting question. I think it goes back to keeping things personal and being accessible. And I think that's always a challenge in any transition. I think it's really easy in leadership to get busy and to lose focus in terms of what's important. And in the end, we can have the best products in the world, but if we don't have those relationships, if we're not there when things do go wrong, you lose that trust. You lose the trust of the integrator. And I always joke, and I say this with a deep amount of love, that they always say habits are hard to break, except in CI, where if it's a good habit, it's really easy to break. But and so just kind of taking that breath sometimes and being like, and putting your head kind of out of the vendor mindset, and just remembering what it's like when you're, I sometimes think, okay, what was it like when I was standing on a sales floor? Granted, most of these guys aren't on sales floors, right? They're in a customer's home, but it's kind of the same thing. You're standing there on a sales floor and you have the customer in front of you, and you just want to make sure that experience goes well, because you're face to face with the customer. So what can we do on our end to make sure that we get you the answers as quickly as possible, that we're providing you with the information you need to, give that customer the best experience and make the dealer look as good as possible.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that insight, because I mean, for any integrator, I think could learn something from that too with their own transitions, whether it's someone, an owner of a business transitioning out and bringing on that next leader, or just smaller transitions within. I think that insight is important for any transition, whatever it might be in a business. So having that perspective and seeing it from different angles too, I think is pretty cool and neat to be able to get your take on and insights on.
And the truth is, and I will tell you this, that part is way more important than making sure that your bosses, that you got that report to your boss or anything like that. And one of the nice things about Sony is they get that, and even if it's Neil or Tyler or anybody super high up in the company, if I owe them something and I'm like, guys, I need to take care of this first for a customer, they're also so focused. They came up through the same a lot of the same things that I did, and so they really get it, which is great. That the focus has to be on our customers.
Oh, that's awesome. And again, just cool to hear. So looking ahead, you mentioned a little bit about some of the early things you want to do and kind of personalizing that experience. What's kind of the lay of the land right now? It could be Sony in general, or just more CI. What are sort of the areas you think, today and into the future, integrators needed to be, kind of focused on or aware of, in terms to be in order to be successful, whether it's with Sony or just in this channel?
Yeah, I think we're going through a transition period in the overall industry where, during COVID, and even like kind of a hangover after that, right? I think all of us, vendors and the integrators, it was all about just us kind of like scrambling. We're all like, treading water, scrambling, trying to keep our head above water, making sure that you had enough people and, making sure you got the product on time and all these sorts of things, because it was just almost like this flood of business that, it's a great problem to have, but you kind of lose track of sometimes the day-to-day stuff like profitability, making sure that you're on top of, the, cost structures, and you're maximizing sales and all that kind of stuff, because you're just in this kind of always catching up mode. And I think now we're going to be transition. We've been transitioning, and I think it's going to be even more so as we go through this year. Of hey, we really need to focus on the basics. Of looking for new business. Where do we look for new business, and how do we as manufacturers help our integrators, do that? Are we giving them the tools for them to use in partnership with us? I think, and to that, like we just launched CEU courses, so that, we're sponsoring 2 CEU courses that our reps will perform for our dealers, and do lunch and learns and things like that to do outreach to the architect and design community. We also do we're going to continue with our co-marketing, which is marketing that we do on behalf of the dealer, really putting that Sony brand behind the marketing, so that if you're a smaller integrator, and honestly, even a lot of our mid-size and larger integrators, they don't have a big marketing team. So what can we do to leverage the capabilities of Sony to help them market and find new customers, as well as get their customers that maybe bought something from them a few years ago back in for updates. And I think also helping our integrators maximize profitability. What are the ways to utilize the various vendor programs they have? What's the best way to purchase? Planning in advance so that you're getting maximizing your own profitability. I think all of those things are going to get to be a lot more important than they were the past few years, where everybody was just trying to keep up with the business that they had in front of them, instead of really having to fill that pipeline again.
Yeah, there's been like this great reset, that kind of happened, where people were focused on they're in their homes, so upgrading that experience and making sure it's all right. So the project, you didn't have to do much marketing. Granted, you should have been, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't have to, and now all of a sudden, as things slow down, it becomes more difficult for those that hadn't been. So that's a great point and call out for sure for integrators out there listening. I'll wrap it up. One last question for you, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but to have you look out even further, what's kind of the goal, or what do you want to accomplish or hope to accomplish in this role, as you get further into it? I know 3 weeks in, right? Hard to ask. What are you expecting in 5 years? But
clearly, world domination. I mean,
amen.
That's always the end goal. No, I want, so in 5 years, I would hope, I want Sony to really be viewed as a business partner with our dealers. I think that's always been our strength. And I think that's when Sony's been the most successful, is when we've really worked hand in hand with our integrators. We're always going to be the performance leader. That's just our DNA. But like I said before, I don't think it matters how great your product is, if you're not also, doing everything you can in service of your dealers. One of the things I learned, in my time at AudioQuest. There's a lot of Bill Lowe-isms out there for anybody that knows Bill Lowe. But one of the things he's like, you don't have to be the best at everything, but you have to be as good as everyone at everything. And so it really is about that whole package of best products, really being a reliable partner for our dealers, and having that, continually looking and evaluating, what we're doing to make sure that we're in step with, and in some ways a step ahead sometimes of what the market is going to require of our integrators, and us being there, not just in terms of, I think co-marketing is a great example, and we're looking at other the CEU courses, but ways to support our dealers' business. That's not just about them selling Sony. It's about them having healthy businesses and being great business partners with them. Because we need our dealers to be healthy businesses in order for our business to continue being a healthy business. And we're kind of all in the same boat together.
Yeah, it's that I think it's probably one of the more popular isms in this industry is that the high tide rises all ships, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that rings true in kind of what you're saying, and to another point you made, thinking about it, I don't think you talk about how the product could be great. I don't think I asked a single product related question of you this entire time. So here I am sitting, and I wanted to at some point ask about the HTSA event that I was at, and the wall, and watching like the TV wall or the micro LED display that was up there that I saw get built and then taken down. It was an impressive thing to watch. I'm sitting there, I'm just like chilling in the hallway, in between sessions, and all of a sudden the team walks out and they're taking apart the tie. It was really cool. So I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah,
it was, and to be able to document that. But
and one of the things that's really funny is we know that TVs are not going to get smaller, guys, right? So but at a certain point, and we are already seeing this with like 98-inch TV, it's like, okay, well, how do I get this? How do I get this up the stairs? Like there's a condo, there's a condominium in Aspen that literally they use cranes to like lift the 100-inch TVs to install in the house.
The anxiety that gives me of watching a 98-inch TV on a crane.
And then like what happens if something goes wrong? Like how easy is that to service? Like let me get a crane to exchange this TV for you. And so we have to think like of different ways to do this, right? And one of the cool things, so what you're referring to is our CLED, which is our basically it's almost like a Lego set, the kind of panels that you build into a TV. And one of the cool things is to tie that back into Sony. And just our, the scope of that lens to living room story is that actually we developed that for production. So that's actually that same exact system is what we use at Sony Pictures, and there's several of these studios around the world. In lieu of a green screen. So when you're watching like Game of Thrones or Star Trek and a lot of these other things, we actually have this system where the background is actually recreated on a huge room made out of those panels. 1,500 of those. And
it's like, is that room that looks like it's completely engulfed in like a giant circle? I think I've seen that before, like behind the scenes of a Game of Thrones.
And it has like and it works in conjunction with the camera, so that as that moves, the background moves, and it's super cool. But that is the exact same thing that you can put in your home to watch those films. So you could literally watch a movie that used your TV basically that you have in your living room was the background that created, an alien landscape or something
That's
like that.
impressive.
That's just so cool.
That's so cool. That's incredible.
And the picture is spectacular. It's second to none. There are other video products out there. Most of those kind of come from what they are like more, they were originally developed more for signage and they kind of migrated into the home, whereas ours developed from like video production and migrated into home and signage. So the quality level of the picture is just simply astounding.
It was stunning. Yeah. and we're talking in the hallway of a hotel. So
exactly. And one of the other things too that we had to work on, because we're dealing with on such a large scale in terms of it being basically a studio built out of these, was heat and energy use became a big big issue, right? And a lot of these video walls run really, really hot. Ours does not require any additional cooling, super, super energy efficient. Again, because we had to take that angle because we were dealing with it on such a large scale in these studios. And so there's so many benefits in terms of, how we approach those product designs, and being able to pull from, the different experiences that we are privileged to have at Sony, where, these different things feed into each other. Another little quick thing. So I mentioned a few times, that BVM monitor. Then there's been several different versions of this BVM monitor, which is what the studios and everything they use to basically, color grade the films and things like that in the mastering process. The latest version, you hear a lot about trickle down technology and sort of like the CLED design, like fed into what we do in the home. This is a funny one where our television product development team was actually developing the backlight system for the new Bravia 9 television. And if you've ever seen the Bravia 9 TV demo that we introduced, we had it at CEDIA last year, where you could we peel off the panel. And so you can actually see in the backlight's so detailed that you can actually see the image of, whatever you would see on the screen just in the backlight, which is, it's so
pretty cool.
I love a cool demo. But on the professional side, that was so impressive as they were seeing that in development. They were like, hey, we can benefit from this in our BVM monitor. So this was actually a trickle up technology.
That's pretty, see, it does work both ways.
So we took that. They took that from the TV side of things and brought it into the Pro to make the best grading monitor in the world until we come out with a new, better one.
So see, lens to living room to lens.
Exactly.
It goes both ways. That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Well, this was, a tremendous time. I really appreciate you, Kathleen, taking the time and diving into it with us and, shedding a little light on what this transition has been like for you. And I know we're obviously looking forward to continuing to follow your story and the Sony story, and see where, you guys can't take things into the future. And, knowing that Jeff's still, he's a little bug in the air, right?
He's still right here.
Right, but no, if he would have called during this, that would have been even better.
I know.
Just phone him in real quick. No, well, we truly appreciate it, and like I said, it's thankful for you taking the time and chatting with us, and look forward to catching up down the line.
Awesome, thank you so much. It was great.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Residential Tech Talks podcast, please subscribe to us on the platform you're listening on. Also, be sure to follow Residential Tech Today on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Residential Tech Talks. Autonomous lighting specialist are the Residential Tech Talks.
Home automation, smart device, home or smart house.